welcome to Satellite Superheroes. Thank you very much for finding time in your schedules. Listeners, we're going to be talking about the state of utility veg management in a big way. Yes, that is a topic that you need to understand, know, embrace, love, and learn. And come learn with me because I want to know more about that, being an old crotchety, curmudgeon, old lineman guy. So anyway, we have Jordan. Jordan, how you doing?
Doing great, Scott. I love your enthusiasm. Thanks for having me on today.
So for the listeners, let's level set a little bit. Let's get why you have that great street cred. Give us a little background on who you are.
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned, my name's Jordan Jozak. I work for AiDash in the customer success side of things, but I come from the industry. So I started my career out actually working for Asplin as a line clearance tree trimmer. So I was spikes, harness, saddle, everything, climbing up and down, maintaining right-of-ways every day.
I had to interrupt. Those gaffs on your are much bigger than utility gaffs. I just remember seeing those big old gaffs. You never stuck yourself in the leg, did you?
No, boots lots of time. And it is funny, you did know on that. Tree spikes are longer than poles, but you can always tell an expert climber because a lot of the expert climbers prefer the pole spikes, believe it or not, so you don't gaff yourself. Little street cred tip there.
Yeah. And it hurts if you did that.
Oh, gosh, it sounds like you've been there. I'm sorry to hear that.
Been there, done that. Yeah, yeah. Quality words came out of my mouth. Continue. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So I started right out. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, down in Austin, Texas now. Starting my whole career out, I've always been in the arboricultural world or utility veg management focused. An ISA certified arborist, utility specialist, certified tree care safety professional. And my whole career has been just kind of doing exactly that, trying to address solutions in the utility space. So after some of my boots on the ground time with Asplin, did some work with ACRT and National Grid. And those are the folks that they're considered consulting utility foresters. So we're the ones that are augmenting with the utility to go out and do some pre-inspection work, look at the trees, make sure we're doing the right type of things for companies like Asplin to come on board and actually complete that work. And then after that, I spent some time as a business manager for a company out of Buffalo called Tree Care of New York, where we were kind of a regional contractor, had about 200 folks that were doing the same thing, the same type of wheel as Asplin, sending people out in the field, keeping them safe and getting work done.
I think we take it for granted. I think the general population don't understand the necessity for trimming trees, vegetation management. We take it for granted that our power, and to focus in on utilities, the power just happens, but there's a lot that goes into being able to flip that switch, turn that light on, play whatever your TV, whatever it might be. There's a lot of work to ensure that reliability. So let's dive in to utility veg management. Let's state a problem. What's the issue today? What are we dealing with?
To kind of understand the issues that we're faced today, we have to go a little bit backwards in time, right? We have to kind of understand how we got here. So, looking backwards, one of the big pivotal moments for utilities in North America and really how this affected utility veg management was back in 2003. You may be familiar, the big Northeast and Midwest blackout that unfortunately shut off power to, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but millions and millions of customers. And that was really due to unmaintained transmission right away. So after 2003, NERC, or the North American Reliability Corporation, kind of the regulator for all North American utilities, came on board and said, we have to do better. And one of the solutions that they found to do better was create something called FACO 3, which basically said utilities have to inspect your lines. And this was a very segmented view. They were just looking at the bulk lines or high voltage transmission corridors. But they said every utility's got to have some type of inspection process. So regardless if you're doing work, I want to make sure you're getting ahead and you're looking to find blind spots. So we don't have exactly what happened back in 2003. Completely driven by vegetation. Kind of tying back to what you said, you really do take for granted driving down the street. Trees are just trees. There's a power line. You never really think about that, but gosh, over 80% of outages are caused by vegetation. So It's a huge, huge problem that is consistently ongoing. Trees are not static, right? They grow.
No, they're not. They're very dynamic and they grow at different rates and they cause different problems. For clarification, you sort of glossed over this FACO. Is that an acronym for something?
Yep. So FACO 3, it's just basically a regulatory term to go back into the filings to see one of these clauses that essentially tells utilities you shall do this, or in essence, you have to do this.
All right. So the reality is that we had an issue. Regulators stepped in, said utilities, you got to do a better job. And quite frankly, when power goes out, when we have a hurricane down here in Louisiana, it becomes a big issue when you can't get the power on, and it becomes 24/7 on your mind as a consumer that power is not on. And so, yeah, there's a necessity. And if 80%, you said 80% of outages are veg management related?
So it's really going to depend on the utility. So overarching, some are going to be dramatically less, some are going to be even more than 80%. So you'd have to fact check me on that. But I think most listeners would agree that one of the primary drivers of outages is vegetation.
Yeah, I mean, it's anything above 50 is pretty doggone important, statistically speaking. So if, in general, we're talking about that, and I can vouch for that. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. There might be other regional challenges with interruptions, but for the most part, it's definitely going to be veg management. So we've got this problem. It's not going away. It seems like it has increased the demand, the focus, the attention. I know I can't, from a workforce perspective, just hire people off the street and say, hey, go trim trees. That ain't going to happen. What are utilities in general have to start to consider? And we got to keep those trees out of line. What are we doing?
So that's the interesting thing. So if we kind of go back just in recent history, like let's go back 4 or 5 years. As anyone knows, unfortunately, the wildfire risks and wildfire mitigation problems that we're seeing from the West Coast, the Midwest areas are just exploding. So I think from 2018 onwards, the amount of billion dollar disasters, either driven from storms or wildfires, are increasing, tying back to climate change. We're seeing a larger volume and a multitude of storms, and the actual severity of the damage they're causing gets worse and worse every year, right? So we have that issue that we're facing. So we're already trying to do better, right? We learned that lesson back in 2003. Now we have these compounding things. There's increased storms, and one of the main drivers right now, and I'm sure you can vouch to this being on the line side, is actual resources are becoming more and more of an issue. I was just reading an interesting stat from the trades side of things that essentially every new person that comes into a trades industry, some type of skilled trades, whether that's line work, tree care, utility, vegetation, there's 5 that are walking out the door retiring behind them. So we can't keep up the amount of people. So not only do we have this multitude of problem that's increasing, we can't get the people to do it. And because we can't get the people to do it, it's becoming more expensive. So utilities are really faced with this dynamic solution that's just getting worse and worse every year. The writing's on the wall. We're not going to get out of this tomorrow. So there's an increased focus to what can we do to optimize what we have today. And that's where regulators right now, so kind of understanding how electric utilities, playing with regulators, how they make money, where do we get this money to spend, right? When you think about that, what a lot of people don't know is majority of the time, electricity is a pass-through item, right? They're not making money on the electricity. They're going to buy it and they're going to sell it to you. They're going to make money on delivery and other sorts of things, the pole maintenance, all of that. But regulators set the rate that the utility can charge you. So this happens at a state level and a federal level. And oftentimes utilities are saying, we need more money just to do the same amount we were doing 5 years ago, right? Costs are going up. Regulators are scrutinizing this. And there's this expectation that you need to do more with what you have right now. So utilities are kind of in this rock and a hard place. I don't have the resources. The resource is more expensive. I have a need to do more, right? All this stuff is increasing and compounding reliability outages and things like that. So we're kind of stuck in this place, Scott, where how can we accomplish the same goals, keep the lights on, that we just can't physically do due to cost and the driving factors of weather right now?
It's a non-negotiable. It has to happen. And it's interesting to see the market pushback. You start having interruptions that are not, for me as a consumer, a hurricane comes through, power goes out. I'm able to say, oh, hurricane, power outage. I make the connection. But if it's just sunny, nice, power outage, that doesn't bode well for anybody. And I hear what you're saying. So we have a workforce challenge. We've got increased costs. We've got regulatory pressures on utilities. We've got a lot of retirements that are taking place, this sort of silver tsunami that's leaving. It's always been happening that way, quite frankly. And the inability to be able to backfill. What solutions exist out there so that utility, can achieve the reliable service that is demanded by my market?
So most utilities have something similar to this in place. It's kind of the foundation of utility vegetation management. And what I mean by that is there's typically some type of what we term cycle program. And a cycle program basically means if I have 1,000 miles of power line, right, I'm going to visit 200 miles of that every 5 years, and I'm going to rinse and repeat. So I'm going to go out, do 200 miles. We're going to send vegetation crews. We're going to trim back vegetation from the conductors or prune back vegetation from the conductors, get rid of some dangerous and hazardous trees, and just keep moving down the line. And then in that 5th year and going into the 6th, we're going to rinse and repeat and do the same thing again. Yeah. So now that mentality of doing things the way that they were, now we have increased cost. We can't do that. We have a need to do more because the storm resiliency initiatives that are going on. So how can we really accomplish that? And that was one of the big things that stood out to me, during my tenure in my career, whether I was in the field or actually on the business side of things, is there's got to be a smarter way to do this. And the smarter way to do that really lies in technology. So there's a bunch of technology solutions out there today. Essentially, what the basis is around is kind of an overarching term of remote sensing. When I say remote sensing, I mean looking at something, gathering data points, and then making a decision off that data. So that cycle program of let's just do the same XYZ amount every year. What happens with different utilities is they may be leaving some meat on the bone. Why are we doing this area that maybe we don't have to do when over here it's burning? And then when that hurricane comes through, this is going to be plowed down and power is going to be out. How can we controvert that? So gathering data through remote sensing techniques and then making decisions off that data has really been key to optimizing this program. And that's one of the big reasons I'm here with AiDash, because I've saw the effects on the utilities, and they're between a rock and a hard place. I saw the effect on the contractors, right? Hey, guess what? The budget ran out. Find somewhere for your guys, right? That's a bad position to be in for the contractors. And there's compounds and compounds and compounds. So I wanted to work with a company that was really building an innovative solution to this. So in the past, right, there's been different types of techniques in the remote sensing field that I described, like LiDAR, like aerial helicopters, fixed wing aircraft, someone actually manually looking, saying, hey, we have to go here. We don't have to go here. There's been drones, right? The UAV market has exploded, and then attaching sensors to different UAVs. But all those have one limitation, and it's that they still require people, and it still requires a lot of time to gather all that data. So we looked at the satellite industry, and we think about satellites. They're booming, they're exploding. In 2020 alone, there's going to be 1,000, or 2020 to 2022, 1,000 satellites every year, and that curve is increasing dramatically. Props to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos for building those rockets, I suppose.
It's what I hear you saying is, which is really interesting, that satellites have been around for a long time. I think the real new part of satellites is out now. It's being commercialized, and that businesses have access to whatever the data is being collected. And so what I also hear is that if I'm a utility, I have dollars. It's limited dollars. It's budgeted dollars. It is being managed, and eyeballs are on it from a regulatory perspective, that the spending is prudent, right? So that's good. The way I see it is that the deployment of technology allows me to deploy my maintenance dollars more effectively and efficiently. Is that what I hear you saying?
You're absolutely correct, right? So if we can have this data, we have the data on the network. One of the big advantages to satellite is, as you said, satellites have been in orbit forever, right? They've always been there. So we can literally travel back in time. So we can go back multiple years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it may be, and look at the way vegetation was and compound that, predicting the future of how it's going to be tomorrow, with all that historical growth modeling and things that AI, machine learning have really unlocked on the technology side. So it's not a matter of guessing anymore. And that's been a huge factor of the way that things were with that cycle type program. We're going to do our best. We've been doing this. We're on this cycle. But again, is that the right approach? And you don't know that approach without the data. And then when you look at the techniques to get the data, why not use satellite, where it's the cheapest, it's the quickest, and the most effective?
Yeah, but there's also has to be this sort of analytic solution technology. It's one thing to collect it. Now I have to analyze it. And I hear that AiDash has really fantastic tech to be able to analyze it. I can grab it. It's data. But how do I make sense of that, or tactical sense? Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, with this huge amounts of data, we're talking terabytes, right? So these points, this vegetation, this is growing that at this span. You have to find a way to prioritize, optimize, and make a decision off that, right? So that's where AI has really leveraged the ability to make decisions automatically and take these huge data sets and help us understand, what does this mean for me? If I'm trying to accomplish this, how do I get there the quickest way? And that's where AI and machine learning have really been a huge advantage to basically ingesting and making actual decisions.
Yeah. And from a budgeting perspective, having that information at hand, you can see where you need to spend those dollars, work with your third-party contractor, be able to have that, meaningful collaboration to say, okay, we're going to keep you engaged for a year. This is where we're going. Here's the plan. Here's the data. And then begin to continue to refine and improve that information so that come next year, you have more information, more insights.
You're totally correct. So I always try to bring this back to the analogy of we're not going to win against nature, right? You can't fight nature. If you're trying to force these cycle programs into nature, because nature's going to grow the way that it grows, you're never going to win, right? So if you cater your program more around natural growth rates, the way that biodiversity and vegetation is currently acting, you can get a lot more done, and you get a lot more done in the right places. You're not fighting it.
It seems like a stunning. I'm always excited about the technology and how it's improving our lives in a way that the majority of us we just don't know. We just take it for granted, and maybe that's good. But there's got to be some resistance. What's happening out there that would, why wouldn't I want to use this?
And it comes down to a lot of factors. So if we think about pressure, right? We just talked about 2018, storms are increasing, costs are going up, things are accelerating. This has not been a nice little easy thing. We kind of saw this coming. It's on this curve like this, and you need to act now. So everybody is scrambling, trying to figure out what's going to be the best approach. And there's a lot of different technology solutions out there. But when we think about technology, specifically in a space where, we used to climb trees, used to climb poles, we did it with our hands, we did it with our eyes. There's a bit of a stigma, right? I don't trust technology. I didn't trust technology for the longest time. And great example is, I'm sure if you pull up Google Maps right now, which most people have exposure to some type of satellite imagery, Google Maps, Apple Maps, Bing Maps, right? You're probably going to see your car from 5 or 6 years ago. And you're going to think to yourself, what the heck am I going to do with this, right? So understanding the capabilities and how this different technology works really allows the advantage to deploy it. And with that comes some change management, right? So I think now that utilities are really feeling this pressure, and it's not just the utilities, like I said, the contractors feel this. It is a very almost co-employee type relationship, and working together to find ways to, let's strengthen the relationship with our contractors. Let's make sure we're going to have the dollars we can do this year and next year, and we're going to keep those guys working, because everyone that comes in, 5 are going out the door. We have to keep what we have. And then again, think to the future of, I know I'm accomplishing these goals, and these are going to be the results I'm going to see. That's where technology and, again, AI can actually model that. It's not a guessing game anymore. So I think there's been a lot of innovation in the space. I think we're just on the tip of the iceberg, right? Yeah. Satellites and emerging technology, UAVs are just getting deployed. LiDAR's been around for some time, but that's dramatically improving. So I think everyone recognizes the need to do something. When you're on this accelerating push, there's a lot of pressure. It's tough to make that decision, especially when you think about, how am I going to implement this, right? And what are going to be my limitations with this? And are we actually going to get the things we need to make the decision now, not 2 years down the road?
There's of course, you're absolutely spot on with the velocity of technology and the velocity of how the market is changing, and how do you respond to that? Again, non-negotiable. The utilities have to deliver power, and it has to be reliable, and it has to be consistent, and all of the things that are the drivers. Do you find that as technologies begin to evolve, that there's a convergence that I want a high probability of success, and therefore taking, satellite, LiDAR, all of the technologies that a utility is looking to deploy or in the middle of deploying, to be able to pull that together, to be able to come up with a high confidence of whatever probability there.
Yeah, definitely. There's synergies with all these type of technologies, right? Some do better than others in certain areas, and some are the all-encompassing view, right? Obviously, I'm biased. I believe in satellite. That's the reason I'm here, trying to make this work in the vegetation industry. But the truth is that a lot of utilities are finding synergies with all these types of programs. And as you said, it's accelerating. So what a lot will do is, let's test this. And we encourage everyone, don't just trust us, right? Let's test this. Let's make sure this is a right fit. We're going to get the goals that you're going to see. And that's one of the big advantages to something more like satellite, where you're not sending a helicopter or fixed wing aircraft in the field and waiting 8 months to get your data back. This is a quick and easy process, and it can get you up to speed quickly, right? Within 8 weeks. So that's one of the big advantages to trying this out. And I encourage every utility, right? Every utility, whether it's you're looking at LiDAR, you have an active LiDAR program, you're looking at UAV and drones, they all have pieces to play. Investigate every opportunity out there, because you never know what's going to fit the best for you.
It has to happen. You know, we're not going to shut down the utility and say, that's it, man. Too many people are leaving. We can't do this, whatever it might be. That's not going to happen. So it just seems to me, given the challenges that exist in the marketplace today, that technology has to play a huge role. Just does. And so as we wrap up, Jordan, where do you see sort of, we're still at the beginning. I think we're just right at the beginning, and it's just going to, where do you see this going in the world of veg management?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a lot of points there. You know, I'm naturally an optimist, right? So I think over time, technology as a whole is going to be adopted more. You have a younger workforce getting into the utilities, looking at a different technique and a different way to approach problems and find solutions for them, which is great. Right. But truth be told, I do think it's a bit of a sobering story that I think the number one, the workforce issues, that ball's already rolling. We're not going to pivot. So we're going to continue to feel strain there. Resources are going to become more expensive, and they're going to become less and less. I unfortunately believe there's going to be more wildfires and storms, right? We're not going to fix that right away. So there's going to be this continued pressure. And that's why there is a sense of urgency to act now to try to get ahead of this, because every day that you wait, it's just become, a little bit more and more, and these problems are going to become larger and larger. But on the bright side of that, right? So the same way that these problems are increasing, technology is getting more and more advanced. We can look into the future 5 years, right? We can think about how cross-arm inspection and insulator inspection and even thermal bands being launched by satellites are going to be available. So the advantage to an asset inspection is going to be there. From pipeline and encroachment is going to be there. So the innovation curve is finally getting there. I think this space overall in the last 20 years has been a little dismissed by the technology world, because number one, a lot of people didn't even know it was there. They don't think about the trays, the power lines. There's been a huge focus on smart grid technology and different types of hardware components. I'm glad to see, and I have a lot of faith in where we're going to be, even despite these problems. I think in the 5-year time frame, we're going to be in a much better place in terms of reliability and how we approach vegetation management due to technology.